My name is Evelyn Carter, and I am 63 years old. For most of my life, I have taken pride in being steady. Not glamorous, not dazzling, not particularly exciting, just steady. I kept our home running, kept our bills paid on time, and kept our lives stitched together even when the seams strained. I thought my husband, Mark, appreciated that. I thought it was part of what made our marriage strong. Most mornings, my routine was the same. I brewed a single cup of dark coffee, opened the blinds in our modest but cozy living room, and settled at my desk with a little stack of envelopes. Property tax reminders, insurance statements, retirement account summaries. I'd track everything with quiet diligence. Mark used to call it my superpower. He would pat my shoulder affectionately when I balanced our books. Sometimes he even joked that if I ever left him, he'd be bankrupt within a month. But over the years, something shifted. The man who once appreciated my organizational mind began to bristle whenever I reminded him of overdue paperwork. He grew impatient when I asked about receipts or when I corrected his spending estimates. It wasn't hostile. Not at first. Just a growing tension, the kind that burrows under the skin of a long marriage and waits. The first real sign something was wrong came on a rainy Wednesday in March. I was going through the credit card statement, sitting at the dining table while Mark scrolled through his phone across from me. I noticed several odd purchases, nothing dramatic, but enough to form a thread I couldn't ignore. A weekend rental car I knew nothing about. A restaurant in a part of town Mark rarely visited. A hotel charge, tiny but suspiciously placed between two business lunches. I didn't say anything then. I only paused long enough for the gears in my mind to click quietly into place. When I glanced up, Mark was watching me. For a brief moment, his expression tightened, something defensive flickered across his face. Then he smiled, too casually, as if he'd caught himself in the wrong emotion. "Everything okay?" he asked. I returned the smile. "Of course. Just checking expenses." He nodded, but his eyes darted away. And I felt, deep in my bones, that something in our marriage had slipped sideways. Something he didn't want me to see. I told myself I was overthinking. A woman my age learns the difference between intuition and anxiety, and this felt like intuition. Still, I folded the statement neatly and tucked it into the cabinet drawer. I didn't want to confront him without clarity. Over the years, clarity had become my quiet armor. That night, lying in bed beside him, listening to the rhythmic rasp of his breathing, I wondered what truth lay just beyond my reach. I didn't yet know that within weeks, the truth would arrive with a sting sharper than any betrayal I'd faced. And it would begin with one simple, dismissive command, delivered by the man who used to call me his partner. Stop controlling the finances. Those words would crack open the life I thought we shared. But they would also open the door to a kind of strength I didn't know I still possessed. And as strange as it sounds, his downfall would begin the moment he realized he didn't even know how to pay his own taxes. It happened on an otherwise unremarkable Saturday afternoon. The sun was sharp, the air warm, and Mark and I were sorting through the mail at the dining table. I had just placed the tax packet, a thick envelope from the IRS, on his side of the table when he snapped. "I'll take care of it," he said. I nodded, thinking nothing of it. "All right. But the deadline is coming up, so—" "Evelyn," he interrupted, his tone clipped. "I said I'll take care of it." I paused. Mark rarely cut me off like that. I tried to defuse the tension. "I wasn't trying to nag. Just reminding you." Then he pushed back in his chair, folding his arms as if preparing for battle. "Actually," he said, "I've been thinking. You need to stop controlling the finances." The words dropped like stones. Heavy, unexpected, and deeply untrue. I controlled the finances because he asked me to. Because he struggled with organization. Because someone had to. I studied his face. There was arrogance there, an inflated confidence I didn't recognize. But beneath it was something else. Fear. Controlling. I repeated quietly. That's how you see it. That's how it is, he snapped. Every time I spend $1, you're on me. Every time I try to handle something, you're hovering. I'm not a child, Evelyn. I sat back, stunned. Of course, I could have argued. I could have listed every late payment I prevented, every overdraft I resolved, every moment I covered for him when he forgot. But something in his expression told me it wouldn't matter. Not today. What brought this on? I asked. He shrugged too casually. Just tired of being micromanaged. I'm taking over. All of it. I nodded slowly, forcing my voice to remain even. If that's really what you want, then all right. You can handle the bills, the accounts, the taxes. I won't step in. His relief was immediate. Too immediate. He looked triumphant, as if he had just won a battle I never agreed to fight. Good, he said. This is how a marriage should be. Equal. A strange bitterness rose in my throat. Equal. As if I hadn't carried the bulk of the invisible labor for 4 decades. But I stepped back. I let him have it. I watched him march around the house with his newfound authority, rearranging paperwork, fussing with the laptop, pretending to understand what he was doing. It might have even amused me, if his sudden hostility hadn't unsettled me so deeply. Days passed. I kept my distance. I didn't ask questions. I didn't interfere. And in that silence, the pieces began falling into place. The rental car. The secret restaurant charges. The hotel. I could feel the shape of the truth forming, dark and undeniable. And it terrified me more than the financial mess I suspected he'd create. But the tipping point, the moment I knew something was truly wrong, came 2 weeks later. Mark stood in the doorway of my study, holding a blank stack of tax forms, looking like a man who'd stumbled into a foreign country. Evelyn? He asked. I glanced up. Yes. He shifted awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. Can you show me how to pay my taxes? It was a question loaded with more truth than he intended. Because it wasn't just about taxes. It was about everything he didn't understand. Everything he tried to hide. Everything he tried to remove me from. He didn't want to be in control. He wanted me blind. I closed my notebook slowly and met his eyes. No, Mark. You told me to stop controlling the finances. So you'll handle this. His face fell. And I felt the first true spark of suspicion flare into certainty. He wasn't overwhelmed. He was guilty. The weeks that followed pulled me back into memories I hadn't examined in years. When you're married for decades, you accumulate habits, rhythms, and blind spots that become part of your daily life without you even noticing. I began to question when things had changed, when Mark shifted from appreciative to defensive, from open to secretive. Mark and I married young. I was 30, steady and practical, and he was 32, charming and ambitious. I was raised in a household where the women kept meticulous books, and the men worked with their hands. My mother used to say that knowing where your money went was a form of self-respect. I carried that forward into adulthood, perhaps too rigidly at times, but always with good intentions. Mark, on the other hand, had always been careless. Financially, emotionally, and sometimes morally. He loved taking risks, loved the thrill of a spontaneous purchase or a random business venture. Over the years, I learned how to support him without letting us slide into chaos. When he forgot payments, I paid them. When he overspent, I reorganized the budget. When he made impulsive decisions, I quietly protected us from the fallout. But about a year ago, something in him began to shift. He grew restless. He stayed out late. He took extra work trips. He bought clothes I didn't recognize and cologne I didn't choose. None of that seemed alarming at first. People change with age. They reinvent themselves. I assumed it was harmless. It wasn't. The memory that resurfaced most insistently was the night he came home far too late, stumbling through the doorway with his shirt half untucked. I asked where he'd been. He brushed me off with a vague explanation about drinks with a colleague. His voice was sharp, sharper than I'd ever heard it. I told myself not to read into it. But now, viewing it with clearer eyes, I felt foolish. And then there were the lies. Small at first. Then larger. When you're married, lies don't drop like stones. They seep in through the cracks, slowly filling the space between you until you're both standing in a room flooded with things unsaid. When Mark declared that I was controlling the finances, I realized something important. The accusation wasn't about money at all. It was about scrutiny. He didn't want me asking questions. He didn't want me seeing receipts. He didn't want me noticing gaps in stories or inconsistencies in timelines. He wanted the freedom to hide something. And as that thought crystallized, another memory flickered into place. His sudden enthusiasm for a new female coworker named Brianna. He'd mentioned her off-handedly months ago, praising her intelligence and wit. He brushed off my questions with casual indifference. "She's young enough to be my daughter," he'd said. That comment sat with me now in a different light. When I replayed his tone, his defensiveness, his subtle shift in behavior, I could feel the pattern forming like a bruise in my mind. And somewhere deep inside, the calm, steady version of myself stirred awake. Not the woman who'd been dismissed, ignored, and minimized, but the woman who had survived life's storms with quiet strength. Mark thought I was unaware. He thought he could push me away with accusations of control. He thought I would simply step aside and let him dig himself deeper into whatever mess he was creating. But he forgot who I was. I had lived through more than he ever knew. I had faced loss, hardship, illness, betrayal, and disappointment. And through it all, I had remained composed, thoughtful, and deeply observant. So when he told me to stop handling the finances, when he snapped that command across the dining table, he wasn't freeing himself. He was releasing me. Releasing me from the illusion that I could trust him. Releasing me from the belief that silence was safer. Releasing me from the years of patient, unthanked labor that kept our life afloat. And in that release, my motives became clear. I wasn't going to lash out. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to accuse without proof. I was going to watch. And I was going to uncover every truth he tried to bury. Mark thought he wanted independence. He was about to learn what accountability felt like. I didn't break into his accounts. I didn't install trackers. I didn't cross any legal or moral boundaries. That's never been my way. My revenge, if you want to call it that, has always been rooted in clarity, logic, and documentation. And Mark practically handed me the clues. The first clue came in the form of a crumpled receipt he left on the washing machine. It was from a restaurant I knew well, one of the more expensive spots downtown. 2 entrees. 1 bottle of red wine. A dessert we never ordered as a couple. The date matched one of his late nights at the office. I placed the receipt in a folder labeled Household Papers, knowing he would never check. The second clue arrived via email. He had forgotten to log out of the shared laptop before leaving for the store. His inbox was open, and I didn't touch anything, not even the mouse. But I couldn't help noticing the subject lines. Confirmations for bookings he never told me about, messages from Brianna about our reservations, and one message with the subject line, "Can we talk before she finds out?" He never realized those subject lines were visible on the preview pane. The third clue came from the credit card bill, the one he insisted he would handle. A payment was overdue. A late fee slapped on. When I asked if he needed help, he dismissed me with an irritated grunt. I knew better than to push. I simply added the late bill to my folder. The more I watched, the clearer everything became. Mark was flailing. His lies were sloppy, inconsistent, poorly thought out. He was juggling a separate life and didn't have the mental discipline to maintain it. I, on the other hand, had spent decades managing complexity without ever needing praise. A part of me felt sorrow, not for the lies, but for the realization that the man I trusted for so long underestimated me so profoundly. He thought age made me slow, fragile, or inattentive. He had forgotten that age sharpens a woman's intuition like a blade. The turning point came one evening when he returned home smelling faintly of perfume. Not the floral scent I wore. A younger, sweeter fragrance. I recognized it instantly from the faint traces left on the receipt I had stored away. He tried to kiss my cheek. I turned my face away. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." He nodded absently and went upstairs. But that night, while he slept, I sat at my desk with my folder. I laid out every receipt, every printout, every timeline discrepancy. I wasn't frantic. I wasn't angry. I was methodical. With each piece of evidence, the truth began assembling itself like a puzzle I had solved long before the final piece clicked into place. He was having an affair. He was hiding money. And he was preparing, clumsily, to leave me in financial chaos. The final clue slipped into my hands when I checked the mailbox on a quiet Tuesday morning. An envelope with the logo of a financial institution I didn't recognize. Inside was a withdrawal confirmation from an account Mark had opened without telling me. My name wasn't on it. That was the moment something inside me settled. Not broken. Settled. Like the moment you finally understand a long unsolved mystery. I placed the paper in my folder, closed it, and took a deep breath. The truth was mine now. And soon, I would make sure he understood that hiding things from me was the worst mistake he could have made. The unraveling happened faster than I expected. Once I had the evidence, all that remained was to understand the why behind his lies. Affairs often have patterns, emotional voids, crises, insecurities. But this one felt different. Mark wasn't running towards something. He was running away from himself. I started by quietly reviewing our shared accounts, only the ones I was legally on. I didn't snoop where I didn't belong. I simply noted what had changed since he seized control. The picture was ugly. Missed payments. Random transfers. Withdrawals without purpose. It was as if he had handed financial responsibility to a child and hoped no one would notice. But the moment the full truth crystallized was when I went through the tax documents he had left scattered on the kitchen counter. They were untouched, still crisp, still sealed. He hadn't even opened them. I remembered his frantic question. "Can you show me how to pay my taxes?" The absurdity of it hit me then. A man boldly accusing me of controlling the finances couldn't even complete the simplest adult responsibility. And underneath his bluster, I recognized something familiar. Fear. The fear of exposure. That night, sitting alone in the living room, I pieced together the timeline with calm, deliberate precision. The hidden account was opened 6 months ago, the same month he'd started mentioning Brianna more often. The restaurant receipt was from 3 months ago. The hotel booking, 4 months. The rental car, 2. And then there was the email with the subject line, "Can we talk before she finds out?" That one stuck in my mind like a thorn. It suggested not just secrecy, but panic. Someone else knew what he was doing. Someone who feared I might uncover it. I didn't need to read their conversations to know the truth. My intuition, sharpened by age and experience, filled in the gaps with uncanny accuracy. Mark had promised Brianna something. Money, most likely. A future, perhaps. He was preparing for a life beyond our marriage. But he lacked the backbone to confront me directly. Instead, he tried to push me out of the financial picture so he could manipulate our accounts without scrutiny. He underestimated me. That wasn't new. What was new was the realization that his betrayal did not break me. It clarified me. It burned away the illusions and left only the truth. I was more capable, more aware, and more composed than he had ever given me credit for. And he was about to face the consequences of assuming I would remain silent. I knew the next step would require care, precision, documentation, and a calm that came from decades of mastering the art of restraint. I gathered everything in my folder and placed it inside a larger envelope labeled simply, "For our discussion." I slid it into my desk drawer. Mark didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath his duplicity was shifting. Every lie he told was now neatly catalogued, time-stamped, and prepared. And when the moment came, I would confront him. Not with rage, but with irrefutable truth. Because that is the most ethical revenge of all. The confrontation happened on a quiet Sunday morning. Sunlight filtered through the blinds in soft slants, bathing the living room in warmth that felt almost deceptive. Mark was seated on the couch, scrolling through his phone with the restless twitchiness I had come to recognize as guilt. I sat down across from him, folder in hand. "Mark," I said calmly, "we need to talk." He looked up, startled by my tone, too steady, too prepared. "About what?" I placed the envelope on the coffee table between us. "About this." He stiffened. "What's that supposed to be?" "Documentation," I said, "of the past 6 months." He tried to laugh, too loudly, too forced. "Oh, come on, Evelyn. What, you've been spying on me now?" "No," I replied. "I've been observing. And organizing. Something you asked me not to do, if you remember." His face twitched. "I told you to stop controlling everything." "And I did," I said. "Which made your mistakes much easier to see." He opened his mouth to argue, but I continued, my voice as steady as the pulse in my wrist. "In this folder," I said, sliding it toward him, "you'll find receipts, statements, timelines, and email previews, everything you've forgotten to hide." He turned pale. "You had no right." "I had every right," I interrupted, still calm. "This is our marriage. These are our finances. And your actions impact my life." He swallowed hard. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the folder. He saw the first piece of evidence, the restaurant receipt. His face stiffened. "That was a business dinner," he muttered. "The reservation was for 2, I said. "And you told me you had a sandwich at your desk that night." He flipped to the next item. The hotel statement. His breathing quickened. "I can explain." "You don't need to explain," I said. "I understand it perfectly." Then he reached the email printout. The preview pane with Brianna's name. And the subject line that changed everything. His shoulders sagged. "Evelyn," he whispered. "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," I said. "And you need to stop insulting my intelligence." A long, brittle silence followed. The kind of silence that ends marriages. Finally, he spoke. "I made a mistake." "No," I corrected gently. "You made a series of choices." He buried his face in his hands. "I don't know what I was doing. I got caught up." "She was younger. She made me feel." "I know what she made you feel," I said. "But that's not the issue." He looked up, confused. I continued. "You lied. You hid money. You tried to push me out of our finances to make room for your deception. And you thought I wouldn't find out." "I was going to stop," he insisted weakly. "I swear. I was going to end things with her." I nodded slowly. "You already have." He blinked. "What?" "I spoke to Brianna," I said. The shock on his face would have been almost comedic if the situation weren't so tragic. "You talked to her?" "Yes," I replied. "She messaged me. She didn't know we were still married. She thought you were separated. She told me everything." He sank back on the couch, defeated. "I didn't want this," he whispered. "I know," I said softly. "You wanted both, your marriage and your affair. But life doesn't work that way." A tear formed in the corner of his eye, but I stayed steady. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't cold. I was simply done being deceived. "I'm not here to punish you," I said. "I'm here to make things clear. You are going to take responsibility for your finances, your taxes, your lies, and the consequences that follow." He wiped his face. "Do you want a divorce?" "No," I said. "But I want accountability. And boundaries. and transparency. I stood, collecting the folder. I will not be spoken to like a burden again. I will not be pushed aside. And I will not tolerate deceit. He nodded, eyes downcast. The confrontation was over. But the consequences were just beginning. In the weeks that followed, Mark faced the consequences of his actions. Not because I punished him, but because the truth has a way of rearranging a person's life whether they're ready or not. The first consequence was financial. Mark tried, for the first time in our marriage, to manage everything on his own. He quickly realized adulthood doesn't bend to pride. He spent hours trying to decipher tax instructions, only to discover he'd already missed a deadline extension. A penalty notice arrived in the mail, and his hands shook as he opened it. He didn't ask me for help. Not anymore. The second consequence was professional. His affair with Brianna hadn't been a secret in the office as he believed. Whispered rumors surfaced. HR became involved. Brianna requested a transfer. Mark, humiliated, chose early retirement, something he hadn't planned for financially. The third consequence was emotional. He apologized every day for weeks. Soft, quiet apologies that came not from desperation but from recognition. True recognition. He saw the weight I had carried for decades. He saw the structure I provided. The stability. The quiet labor that kept our world intact. He saw, finally, how much he had taken for granted. But I didn't return to my old role. I didn't cushion him from reality. I didn't soften the discomfort. Consequences aren't meant to be comfortable. Instead, I offered guidance only when he asked respectfully, and when I chose to provide it. We established new boundaries. He handled his own accounts. I handled mine. We maintained a joint account strictly for shared expenses. And slowly, something surprising happened. He changed. Not in the dramatic, cinematic way of a man transformed overnight, but in small, steady ways. He started cooking dinner twice a week. He began attending a counseling group for men grappling with infidelity and self-sabotage. He apologized to our children, who had sensed more than we realized. Most importantly, he started listening. Truly listening. And as he unraveled the knots he had tied around himself, I felt myself growing lighter. Not because he fixed everything, but because I no longer expected him to. I had reclaimed my agency, my boundaries, my voice. That was my revenge. Not yelling. Not hurting him. Not destroying him. Requiring him to grow. Watching him carry the weight he once pushed onto me. Seeing him confront the truth of who he had become. One evening, after months of quiet rebuilding, he approached me in the living room. His voice was gentle. "Evelyn," he said. "Thank you for not giving up on me." I looked at him, older, humbled, softened by consequence. "I didn't do it for you," I replied. "I did it for myself." And that honesty became the foundation of whatever came next. At 63, I've learned that life is less about the storms we endure and more about who we become once they've passed. My marriage didn't end, but it didn't stay the same, and that's its own form of justice. Mark learned that respect is not granted by age or title, but by honesty and consistency. I learned that stepping back doesn't mean giving up power. Sometimes it means letting someone experience the weight of their own choices. Never underestimate the quiet strength of a woman who has spent her life observing, learning, and surviving. We don't explode. We don't collapse. We rise, with clarity, with calm, with truth. If you're listening to this story, I want to leave you with this thought. Revenge doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like accountability. Sometimes it looks like boundaries. And sometimes, it looks like a woman walking back into her own life with her head held high. Tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place?